Hi, Children's Church. Welcome to another week of our Bible story missionary lesson we've been going over called Rainbow Garden. We have a couple more weeks to finish this up. I want to apologize on behalf of Pastor Mike. He forgot to post the questions for this last week, so you weren't able to answer any of the questions. So that is our apologies for that. Also, we're going to be doing a couple of things differently because everyone who's been submitting the questions faithfully has won. We will not be doing that anymore for prizes. So no more prizes will be given out, and congratulations to all of you who have won. And then starting next week, on top of our missionary story that we're going to be doing for Children's Church, Pastor Mike will also be uploading a Sunday school lesson every week for the children to be watching. I think he's going to be rotating the teachers who tell it, so you'll hopefully be watching for your Sunday school teacher, and I'm sure that you'll see them. So those are some of the changes that we're going to be making. Let's get started on our lesson this week and see what happens in the life of Elaine. So Elaine could hardly wait for the week to get past. So Sunday could come, the day that they have their time that they can do things for themselves, and she couldn't wait, but finally Sunday came. And she went up to Miss Owens and she said, "I'm going to be going to you-know-where." And she gave her a little wink, and Mrs. Owens knew exactly where she was going, and she headed to her secret spot. And as she got there, she noticed, because it had rained that week, that a lot more flowers were blooming. It was so pretty. She saw all different kinds of flowers and colors of flowers, and she enjoyed it so much, looking at all the new growth. And she watched a bird fly into a bush, and she knew that sometimes that meant that there was a nest in there. So Elaine peeked through the bush to see, and sure enough, there was a lovely nest in there with two little beautiful eggs sitting in it. And she thought to herself, this is just another lovely secret that I can have all to myself, this lovely bird's nest. She thought, you know what? They think they're so smart. I am not going to tell them about this bird's nest. I'm going to keep it a secret all to myself. Well, also, as she continued to look around the garden and see all the changes that she had noticed, she also noticed something different about the house. So the house still looked dusty and no one was there, and there were cobwebs everywhere, but she noticed that one of the windows had been broken. And so she decided to climb in through the window. It was just enough room for her. So she did that. She climbed in through the window. And she thought to herself, whoever lives in this house or lived in this house was very untidy. A lot of the drawers were pulled open and clothes were laying all over the place. And she looked in every room. Every room was so unkept. Even on top of the spider webs and cobwebs and dust, everything was so untidy. And Elaine went room to room looking, and everything was so untidy. And until she got to one room, she opened the door, and it was like a little girl's room. She could tell it was a little girl's room because of the color of the room, and that there were dolls everywhere in a dollhouse. And she looked around, and she noticed all kinds of lovely toys and dolls, and she thought, oh, I wonder what kind of little girl used to live here. And I wonder if she'll ever be back for her stuff. And as she was looking around this little girl's room, Elaine noticed on a shelf a beautiful, big shell. And she remembered how Peter collected shells. So she thought to herself, you know what? Those kids think that they're better than me and that I can't do anything right. And I see this shell. I'm going to take this shell. I'm going to take it home, and I'm going to pretend like I found this shell on the beach, and I'm going to give it to Peter. And they're going to think, wow, Elaine found this amazing shell. And again, it didn't even bother Elaine at all that she was stealing or that she was going to lie. So she decided to take this home to Peter. So she did just that. She carried the shell very carefully home, and she went up to Peter and Janet and she said, "Guess what, Peter? I found this shell for you." And Peter said, "You mean you've already been all the way to the beach and back and you found this shell?" And she said, "Well, I found this shell for you." And then Peter started to question her even more, and he said, the beaches around here, we've never found a shell. You can't find a shell like that at these beaches. And Elaine started to get upset. She thought maybe she was being caught in her lie. And she said, "You are so mean to me, and you're selfish, and you think you're better than me. You don't want me to play with you." And she started getting mad and saying unkind things to Peter. And Peter said, wait. I was only saying that if this shell did come from one of our beaches, it would have had to have washed up for miles and miles and miles away, another beach. And he said, "Thank you so much. I appreciate this shell." And he started, his tone changed a little bit. He realized he was hurting Elaine's feelings, and he then just expressed his gratefulness for this shell. Well, they didn't realize that Mr. Owens was there, and he was hearing their conversation. And he came up to Elaine and he said, excuse me, he said, "Elaine, can I look at that shell?" And Elaine said, "Sure." And he held the shell and he said, "Oh, Elaine, this is a lovely shell." And Janet said, "I think I've seen a shell like that on Philippa's cabinet." And Elaine said, "Who is Philippa?" And they said, "Oh, haven't we told you about the family who lives in the house up on the corner? The one that has the gate all around it in the garden? Yeah, a family lives there, and a little girl named Philippa lives there, and she is crippled right now, and she can't walk. So they've taken Philippa to the city where they think that they can help her walk." And they said she has a shell like this on her shelf. And Elaine realized that Mr. Owens probably knew exactly where she got that shell. And that evening, when Elaine went to bed, or before bedtime during Bible reading, they were talking about Adam and Eve, and how Adam and Eve had sinned. And because of their sin, they had to leave the garden. And Elaine started thinking about what she had done, about how she knew that lying and stealing the shell were a sin. And she knew that the lovely garden that she enjoyed looking at and tending to, that God probably wouldn't bless it and allow it to amount to much because of her very own sin. And that night, as she lay in bed, she couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about Adam and Eve and sin and her sin, and she started to feel a lot of conviction. And Elaine didn't understand what it was. She just knew that she was feeling really bad, and she started to cry. And she lay in bed crying, and you know what? Mrs. Owens heard her. And she came in and she scooped up Elaine, and she loved on Elaine, and Elaine buried her head in Mrs. Owens' chest, and she just cried and cried. And Mrs. Owens tried to get Elaine to tell her what was wrong, but Elaine didn't. And I think that deep down, Mrs. Owens knew exactly why. Because when we sin, boys and girls, we know, don't we? We don't feel good about ourselves, do we? When we lie or we steal, even if no one else knows. We do, and it can make us feel nasty inside, can't it? And that's how Elaine was feeling. That's where our story ends for today. We have, I want to say, 4 more weeks of this lesson. And I have to tell you, a lot happens between now and the end in the life of Elaine. So make sure that you keep watching to hear more about our lesson. And don't forget, starting next week, on top of our lesson about Elaine, Pastor Mike will be posting another video with a Sunday school lesson for you children. So we'll see you guys next week.